The crown without a coronation, Trump's foreign policy and the quiet resurrection of royal prerogative. 2 months ago, when protesters filled American streets with banners proclaiming "No Kings," Donald Trump and his allies scoffed. The slogan, they said, was hysterical, an overwrought metaphor hurled by political opponents incapable of accepting electoral defeat. America, after all, was founded on a violent rejection of monarchy. Its political religion is constitutionalism, not crown worship. Its presidents are stewards, not sovereigns, and yet, as Mr. Trump has settled back into the Oval Office, the language emanating from Washington has begun to sound curiously regal. Not regal in costume or ceremony, but in philosophy: power as personal, law as optional, restraint as self-imposed. When asked recently what limits existed on his global authority, the president replied with a confidence that would have made Louis XIV nod approvingly. Only his own morality, he explained, could stop him. International law might exist, but only insofar as he chose to recognize it. The irony is almost elegant. A movement that mocked the idea of kingship now speaks fluently in its dialect, the sovereign self. In a lengthy interview with the New York Times this week, January 8, 2026, Mr. Trump offered what the paper described as his most blunt acknowledgement yet of his worldview. It was, in fact, less an acknowledgement than a declaration. Power, in this conception, is neither dispersed nor conditional. It is personal, concentrated, and limited only by the will of its holder. This is not a new impulse in Trumpism. During his first term, Mr. Trump flirted repeatedly with maximalist readings of executive authority. Article 2 of the Constitution, he once claimed, allowed him to do whatever I want. Courts were obstacles, not arbiters. Congress was a nuisance, not a partner. What is different this time is not merely the rhetoric but the arena. The stage is no longer domestic governance but the world itself. Nowhere has this been clearer than in the administration's increasingly aggressive posture toward Venezuela and its embattled strongman. Nicolas Maduro, the hemisphere as fiefdom, the White House no longer bothers with euphemism. America's relationship with its southern neighbors is described not in the language of partnership or diplomacy, but of leverage and diktat. Caroline Leavitt, the administration's press secretary, explained with refreshing candor that America's leverage over Venezuela meant that its decisions would be dictated by the United States of America. Sovereignty, it seems, is a negotiable concept, especially when exercised by someone else. Stephen Miller, one of Mr. Trump's most influential advisors, was even more explicit. In an interview with CNN's Jake Tapper, January 5, 2026, Stephen Miller described a world governed not by norms or rules, but by strength and force. The future of the free world, he argued, depended on America's willingness to assert itself without apology. There is something almost touching about the bluntness. Gone is the pretense that American power is exercised reluctantly, or in service of a broader international order. What remains is power for its own sake, asserted because it can be. Law as a suggestion, the administration insists that it operates within the law. But it also insists that it alone decides what the law requires. This is not constitutionalism, it is jurisprudence by proclamation. Consider the strike against Venezuela. Mr. Trump argued that he did not need congressional approval. The operation, the White House later explained, was not a military action at all, but a law enforcement effort designed to bring an indicted criminal to justice, with the armed forces merely in support. The legal foundation for this claim rests on a controversial Justice Department opinion from the late 1980s, an artifact of Cold War improvisation that grants the president extraordinary latitude to deploy military force abroad in pursuit of indicted individuals. The precedent most often cited is the ouster of Manuel Noriega in Panama. But the comparison is strained. Congress had authorized Noriega's removal. Panama had declared war on the United States. The legal and political contexts were not merely different. They were opposite. In the Venezuelan case, Congress was bypassed. When the Senate attempted to reassert itself by advancing a war powers resolution, Vice President J.D. Vance dismissed the effort as fake and unconstitutional, promising that it would change nothing. The message was unmistakable: legislative oversight is optional, and inconvenient laws are not really laws at all. The presumption of legality. Perhaps the most revealing aspect of this worldview is the administration's treatment of legality itself, not as an external constraint, but as an attribute of presidential intent. Orders issued by the president are presumed lawful by virtue of their origin. To question them is not prudence but sedition. When Democratic lawmakers suggested that soldiers might one day be asked to follow illegal orders, and urged them to refuse if so, the response from the White House was incandescent. Such talk, it claimed, was treasonous. The implication was chilling. The very idea that a president could issue unlawful commands was beyond contemplation. This would be more convincing if Mr. Trump had not, on multiple occasions, publicly floated precisely such orders. During the 2016 campaign, he endorsed torture and the killing of terrorists' families. In 2020, he mused about bombing Iranian cultural sites, an unequivocal war crime. Advisors have since acknowledged that he frequently proposes illegal actions in private, only to retreat when confronted with the consequences. The administration now behaves as though these episodes never happened. The king, after all, cannot issue unlawful decrees, because the decree defines the law, dismantling the referees. Early in his second term, Mr. Trump signed an executive action effectively sidelining the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel, the institutional conscience traditionally tasked with evaluating the legality of executive actions. Henceforth, the President's and Attorney General's opinions on questions of law would be controlling on all employees. In monarchies, this doctrine is known as royal prerogative. In republics, it is supposed to be anathema. By marginalizing internal legal review, the administration has removed one of the few remaining brakes on executive adventurism. Soldiers, Levitt explained, are to presume that all orders are lawful. It is not their place to question. Nor, it increasingly seems, is it anyone else's. A familiar temptation. History is replete with leaders who convinced themselves that restraint was a weakness, that law was a luxury, and that power unexercised was power wasted. What distinguishes Mr. Trump's approach is not its originality, but its brazenness. He does not cloak ambition in ideology or necessity. He states it plainly. There is a certain honesty in this. It strips away the comforting fiction that American power is uniquely virtuous or self-denying. It reveals instead a worldview in which might is not merely right, but sufficient, and yet, this candor carries risks. Empires that forget the difference between authority and force tend to discover it the hard way. Allies become wary. Adversaries become emboldened. The rules that once constrained others begin to constrain no one at all. The world stage. Mr. Trump's defenders argue that this is simply realism, a clear-eyed recognition of how the world actually works. Power matters. Force deters. Law follows strength, not the other way around. There is truth in this, as far as it goes, but realism without restraint is merely cynicism with better tailoring. The post-war order that America built, imperfect, hypocritical, and often violated, nonetheless rested on the idea that even the strong should pretend to be bound by rules. The pretense mattered. It created expectations, habits, and, occasionally, limits. By discarding even the pretense, Mr. Trump risks accelerating the very chaos he claims to abhor. A world in which America recognizes no constraints is a world in which others will feel no obligation to recognize them either. A republic in royal tones. The United States has no crown, no coronation, no hereditary throne. But it does have a president increasingly comfortable speaking as though none of that matters. When the only limit on power is personal morality, the republic begins to resemble something older, and far more fragile. Kings, after all, rarely believe themselves tyrants. They believe themselves necessary. They believe that order depends on their will, that restraint is weakness, and that history will vindicate them. America was founded on the opposite assumption, that power is dangerous, that ambition must be checked, and that no individual can be trusted with absolute authority, even one elected by millions. Mr. Trump may insist that he is no king. He does not need to wear a crown. He has chosen something subtler, and perhaps more American, a monarchy of mindset, draped not in ermine, but in executive orders. The tragedy, should it unfold, will not be that America briefly flirted with royal language. It will be that it forgot why it rejected kings in the first place.